For those who are not aware, the UN brought forth another ceasefire resolution in reference to Israel and Gaza. And as you can imagine, the United States was the only country to veto the resolution for a ceasefire. We're going to get into it with this story here from Al Jazeera.
Welcome to the News Hour. The United States has once again vetoed a draft resolution on Gaza at the UN Security Council. It's the third veto by the US since the start of the war. The text put forward by Algeria called for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and had 13 members voting in favour of it. The US was the only country to vote against it.
We are rapidly approaching a critical juncture where the call to halt the machinery of violence will lose its significance. Today, every Palestinian is a target for death, extermination, and genocide. We should ask ourselves how many innocent lives must be sacrificed before the Council deems it necessary to call for a ceasefire.
And I think that's one of the most important questions that someone can ask. That's Algeria there. How many more Palestinians have to die in order for the U.S. government to not veto a ceasefire? How many? How many more? It's almost as if they're trying to completely wipe everyone out. And that includes the U.S. government, by the way, not just the state of Israel. We already know what they want, but that includes the U.S. government as well. Let's continue here.
Now, the US ambassador to the UN says that while they rejected the text presented by Algeria, they'll be putting forward a rival resolution calling for a temporary ceasefire.
While numerous parties engage in sensitive negotiations, this is not the time for this resolution, which jeopardizes these efforts.
Pause. This woman right now has to be one of the most hated women in the country right now, or actually in the world, because she's the one that raises her hand. And when she is not there, there's an alternate that steps in for her. That is the gentleman who is sitting directly behind her. And we saw him raise his hand before to veto the ceasefire resolution. But she utters these words that now is not the time. It's never the time. Never the time, right? Bernie Sanders told you, and we'll get into this, Bernie Sanders told you that after he lost the primary, the DNC rigged the primary against him and Hillary Clinton in 2016, he told you we got to come out there and support Hillary Clinton because Trump is too dangerous. Now's not the time. Now's not the time for a protest vote. Told you the same thing in 2020. Now's not the time for a protest vote. We talk about Medicare for all. We say everyone needs health care in this country. We're told by our representatives, now is not the time. And I'm pretty sure those who were activists during the civil rights movement were also told now is not the time. During the women's movement, we're told now is not the time. It was never the time. It never will be the time. When they use those words that now is not the time, that is just an excuse to stall progress. Because there never really is a correct time. You have to make it be the time. But that excuse, I've heard it all my life. It's never the time. Some of you that are LGBTQ, I'm pretty sure you heard the same thing before this country made gay marriage legal. Now's not the time. Not now, not yet. So I don't know what more it is going to take for us to wake up, whether it's this woman here who always vetoes, the politicians or whoever. I don't know what more it is going to take for us to really wake these people up and convince them that now is the time. This falls on our hands. And although we're not the ones sending the funds personally, we're not the ones supplying the weapons personally, our country is. And the world is watching the United States government. And you have to realize that not only does this country have blood on their hands. This veto here is essentially allowing for the rest of the Palestinian people to be slaughtered, because you can't sit there and tell Netanyahu he has to do the best that he can to protect the civilians. And they've shown you all along they're not protecting the civilians. And you're sending them food that Israel is blocking from getting to the Palestinian people. Every time they try to go get the food, the IDF kills them for trying to get the food. So you can't sit here, Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, all of you, the House of Representatives, the Senate, all of you. You are making the U.S. people unsafe. They are making Americans unsafe because we are now seen as the country that is allowing the genocide to continue. You have all these other countries that have risen up and said, no. You'll see China as well. We'll get to that. But the U.S. has to be the one to veto. We have to be the one to stop any type of resolution in reference to the Palestinian people. And you know what makes this even worse is that they have a black woman to do it. Let's continue.
Colleagues, I communicated our concerns publicly and privately over the last several weeks. We've submitted numerous rounds of edits. All were ignored. And so for that reason, the United States has offered an alternative resolution that would do what this text does not. Pressure Hamas to take the hostage deal that is on the table and help secure a pause that allows humanitarian assistance to reach Palestinian civilians in desperate need.
Now, you know why this proposal is ridiculous and is BS? Because it was just over a week ago that Hamas offered a ceasefire in exchange for the hostages, and Netanyahu rejected it. So now here we have the United States basically calling for the same thing that Hamas already called for over a week ago that Netanyahu rejected. So you see how they try to play the American people? They're trying to play us, you guys. They know that Netanyahu isn't going to accept that. They know that. So this proposal that they're offering is dead on arrival. This is all theater.
Well, in a moment, we'll get reaction in Gaza with our correspondent Tarek Abu-Azim. But first, let's cross over to our diplomatic editor, James Bays, at the United Nations. And James, often diplomats play their cards very close to their chest when it comes to voting in the Security Council. But I think we had an inkling of what was going to happen today.
We knew what was going to happen today, and I'm afraid we're seeing exactly the same picture that we've seen a number of times before. This is the fourth time that the US has vetoed the idea of a ceasefire in the UN Security Council. And remember, this resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire in Gaza would have passed if it wasn't for the United States using its veto power as a permanent member of the Security Council. Every other member of the Security Council voted for it, apart from the UK. The UK Ambassador Barbara Woodward is explaining her vote to the Security Council right now. They abstained, though, even though they're also a permanent member. That would not have blocked it. It's only the US that, again, has blocked this from happening.
Pay attention to what he just said. Once again, it's only the United States that has blocked this from happening. And the UK, I'm sorry, you have to get a backbone. Okay, because how do you abstain in reference to genocide? You know, this is not this type of situation where you can just fall back and say, I don't want to do yes or no. I'm just going to abstain because that's the safe thing to do. People are dying. People are being slaughtered. You know, how about you stop trying to be the United States puppet and lead on your own accord? This is part of the problem. The UK has to stand on its own and stop following the lead of the United States, because if the United States would have not vetoed the ceasefire, I highly, highly doubt that the UK would have even abstained. Highly doubt it. So here we are again. Now, we're going to see the bad and then we're going to see the good, because it gets worse. We now have Nancy Pelosi out here trying to pretend like none of the arms that went to Israel is actually being used to kill any of the women and children. I can't make this up. Let's get into it.
If you don't like what Israel is doing, and the president has made it clear that some of what Israel is doing he doesn't like,
that's right.
and you go on supplying them with hardware to do those things, you own this operation every bit as much as they do, don't you?
No, we don't. We don't. We have always supported Israel as our national security friend, largely because it was in our interest to do so. Largely because it was in to do so. We had shared values that only democracy in the region. The behavior of Netanyahu is, in my view, inexcusable in terms of how it has affected the collateral damage to children and families and the rest. But nobody can take away the right of any country to defend itself that has been brutally attacked in that way.
Last week,
Notice again, it's the same talking points. No one can take away from the right of a country to defend itself. Notice that they only advocate for the Israelis to defend theirself. The Palestinian people are not allowed to defend themselves. Remember, Gaza does not have an army. This is essentially what they're telling you. We back Israel because we have shared interests. It's the only democracy in the Middle East. Same phrases over and over again. No, you back Israel because you are all aligned with the Israeli lobby. Whether it's AIPAC, whether it's J Street, that's why you back Israel. And yes, there are resources in the Middle East that the United States government loves to get their hands on. And part of that has to deal with oil. And it's not just Israel. There's also oil in Syria, which is also a part of the Syria that the U.S. is occupying, is the region that has the oil.
EU's Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell wondered aloud why the U.S. isn't doing more to have its warnings taken seriously in Jerusalem. If you believe, he said, that too many people are being killed, maybe you should provide fewer arms in order to prevent so many people being killed. He's got a point, hasn't he?
Israel is very well equipped with weaponry. There's nothing that we have sent since October 7th that has contributed to this brutality.
Now we know this is a damn lie. You know, they don't even try to hide it anymore. They're just so out in the open with it. They don't even try to cover it and hide it. So you mean to tell me, Nancy, weapons that you've sent Israel since October 7th, you know for a fact that none of those weapons have been used to kill anyone in Gaza? And how would you know that, Nancy, if you're not there? You guys really believe this? Because I don't believe this. This is BS. Nancy Pelosi is a cold-faced liar. Now, she is saying that because why? She's saying that because she doesn't want the world to see the United States as responsible. But guess what, Nancy? The world already still sees you as responsible regardless of what you say. No one's falling back and believing that. Israel has powerful weapons, partly because they have the support from the United States. This is something that JFK was very worried about, and he warned and cautioned about. And here we are. Wasn't it the United States government that agreed, what was it, a year and a half ago, to fund the Iron Dome for Israel? I guess we have nothing to do with that either.
In the longer run, they're in a dangerous neighborhood, and we will continue to support Israel.
That means we will continue to send them weapons, right? So all these people have to go. Nancy Pelosi needs to retire. These people have to be pushed out. And this congressman, this is the worst of the worst. Congressman Andy Ogles. I want you to hear what he had to say about Palestinians. If you are in Tennessee's 5th district, I think you need to try to get someone to run against this guy, because this is probably the worst of the worst that I've seen said this week.
I've seen the footage of
You've seen footage of
shredded children's bodies. And that's my taxpayer dollars. They're going to bomb those kids.
So I think we should kill them all, if that makes you feel better. Everybody, yes.
I've seen the footage of
You've seen footage of
shredded children's bodies. And that's my taxpayer dollars. They're going to bomb those kids.
So I think we should kill them all, if that makes you feel better. Everybody, yes.
That is Congressman Andrew Ogles from Tennessee's 5th district. Someone needs to get him out of office. Someone needs to challenge him. I don't know if anyone watching lives in Tennessee, but that is disgusting. He said he wished we could kill them all. She was talking to him about children that have been killed. And that's his response. And you wonder why some other countries give America a side eye. That's disgusting. Now, he can say that and not be censured, right? But Rashida Tlaib supporting the pro-Palestinian protests, she's censured. This is what we have in our House of Representatives. This is who we have working there. However, there is some good, because some people are still willing to step up. And one of those countries is China. They actually presented a case towards the ICJ. And I want you to hear this. And I said this before, but now they actually say it in front of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, that according to international law, occupied people have the right to resist. Let's get into this speech here from China at the International Court of Justice.
In pursuit of the right to self-determination, these people have the right to engage in struggles, seek and receive support. On the basis of that right, Palestinian people declared the establishment of State Palestine in 1988, which has been recognized by over 130 countries. In pursuit of the right to self-determination, Palestinian people use force to resist foreign oppression and complete the establishment an independent state is inalienable right, well founded in international law. Various people freed themselves from colonial rule and foreign oppression to realize independent statehood after World War II. Their practices serve as convincing evidence for the right. Numerous other resolutions recognize legitimacy of struggling by all available means, including armed struggle by peoples under colonial domination or foreign occupation, to realize the right to self-determination.
See, that piece there is very important. So when people said, and I don't advocate for any groups killing people, I don't advocate for them implementing violence upon people. But when people made the statement that the Palestinian people don't have the right to resist, under international law, they do, because they are occupied. Gaza is occupied. Despite what some of the Zionists may tell you, these people are under occupation. They are fenced in. Israel controls the land, the air, and the sea. They control the water. The Palestinian people in Gaza, 95% of the water is dirty water. They limit the amount of electricity that they're allowed to have. But more importantly, they cannot freely leave. They can't move freely. Imagine if you couldn't even leave your town. Imagine if you couldn't leave your city, you couldn't leave your state. I live in Massachusetts. Imagine if someone told me you can't go north of Massachusetts, you can't go to New Hampshire, you can't go to Connecticut. You had to stay right where you are at all times. And if for whatever reason you need to go to one of the hospitals, which the hospitals in Israel are better than the hospitals in Gaza, and all of those are now gone. So there's that. You have to get the permission of Israel to leave to go to the hospital. And a lot of those cases are denied. This is why there have been Palestinian people in Gaza that have died from cancer because they couldn't get the treatment that they needed because Israel would not permit them to come to one of the hospitals in Israel to get the treatment. Imagine that. And they expect you not to resist?
For instance, the UNGA resolution 3070 of 1973, I quote, reaffirms the legitimacy of the people's struggle for liberation from colonial and foreign domination and alien subjugation by all available means, including armed struggle, end of quote. This recognition is also reflected in international conventions. For example, the Arab Convention for Suppressing of Terrorism of 1998 affirms, I quote, the right of peoples to combat foreign occupation, aggression by whatever means, including armed struggle, in order to liberate their territories and secure the right to self-determination and independence, end of quote.
Did you catch that part about armed struggle? See, that's important. Shout out to China. You know what's happening, guys? It's the BRICS countries. The BRICS countries are the ones that are really stepping up. And then also Nicaragua. But they're stepping up. You know why? Because they're not aligned with the United States. They're not in the U.S. back pocket. They have formed their own coalition in what they call a multipolar world. So they don't care what the United States says. We look very terrible in the international community right now to be the only ones to raise the hand and to veto that. And at one point, I'm telling you right now, it's not just going to be people calling Joe Biden Genocide Joe and baby killer. They're going to be calling all of us that. This has happened before. During the Vietnam War. Remember that? People were called baby killers. And remember, some of those soldiers didn't even want to go to Vietnam. They were drafted. It's not a reputation that's easy to shake.
Armed struggle in this context is distinguished from acts of terrorism. It is grounded in the international law. This distinction is acknowledged by several international conventions. For example, Article 3 of the OAU Convention on the Prevention and Combating the Terrorism of 1999 provides that, I quote, the struggle waged by peoples in accordance with the principle of international law for their liberation of self-determination, including armed struggle, against colonialism, occupation, aggression, and domination by foreign forces, shall not be considered as terrorist acts.
That piece right there is very important. So shout out to China, because China showed up with like, look, we're going to read what international law actually says. So under international law, they have the right to resist. They have the right to have an armed struggle, and they shall not be considered as terrorist acts. That's the international law, folks. Problem is, A lot of people haven't heard this because even outside of the United States, the media is still controlled by the United States. Imagine that. Imagine that. You have to go to one of the BRICS countries to hear something a little bit different. But for the most part, the media, even outside of the US, is still controlled by the US and the State Department here. This is one of the reasons I think they're so afraid of China, because China doesn't really need us. You see how they join forces with BRICS? They don't really need us like that. And they're not afraid to stand up to the United States. Let's go on a little bit more here.
It should be emphasized that the use of force by any entity or individual in the name of exercising the right to self-determination outside the context of colonial domination or foreign occupation is not legitimate. Meanwhile, during legitimate armed struggle by peoples, all parties are obliged to comply with IHL, and in particular, refrain from committing acts of terrorism in violation of IHL. Against the backdrop of the OPT, well-documented and widely recognized facts indicate that Israel's oppression policies and practices throughout its prolonged occupation of Palestinian territory have severely undermined and impeded the exercise and the full realization of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination.
Shout out to China for doing the damn thing, because China, that was actually China in front of the ICJ, the International Court of Justice. Sorry, I can't talk tonight. International Court of Justice. They showed up to let people know, look, we know the damn law, damn it. And then there's the UAE. Listen to this. Again, other countries are stepping up. Breaking news. This is from Solomon. He's been on the show before. UAE exposes Israel's violation of international law. Let's get into this clip here. So this is the United Arab Emirates. Listen to this.
The 56 years of occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, have been shaped by Israel's consistent, grave violations against the Palestinian people. The UAE is confident that the court has before it ample evidence to assist its identification of those violations and determination of their legal consequences. As I turn to my second point, I will outline briefly how the situation has severely deteriorated since July 2023. Under international law, the Gaza Strip is occupied territory. Gaza is also one of the most densely populated places on Earth. For over 4 months now, and after enduring 17 years of blockade, its population of over 2.2 million has been under siege, faced with severe restrictions on water, food, and other essential goods. The level of human suffering faced by civilians in Gaza, predominantly women and children, is on a scale seldom seen in the modern era. Israel's indiscriminate attacks on the Gaza Strip have caused massive civilian casualties and the extensive destruction of homes, schools, and hospitals. Some 75% of Gaza's total population is displaced. I note here, Mr. President, the latest orders issued to the Israeli Defense Forces to plan for the evacuation of Rafah ahead of another military offensive. That offensive would leave the approximately 1.5 million displaced Gazans taking refuge in the city with nowhere to go. These plans have been met with the international community's resounding rejection. Israel has imposed a policy of collective punishment against the Palestinian people in violation of Article 33 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Israel has repeatedly issued so-called evacuation orders that in effect seek to transfer Palestinians forcibly in violation of Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Israel has also failed its duty of ensuring the food and medical supplies of the population in Gaza in violation of Article 55 of the Fourth Geneva Convention.
You see, the other countries that showed up, they made it very clear that they know the laws under the Geneva Convention. They showed up very prepared.
Israel has further failed to protect the wounded and the sick in violation of Article 16 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. Each passing day is met with further violations of international humanitarian law. And while the eyes of the world are trained on its brutal military operation in Gaza.
So that's the UAE also at the ICJ standing up. And we got to remember, this all started with South Africa. Sometimes it just takes one country or one person to stand up and actually take a chance and fight back, and then others may follow. So had it not been for South Africa, would other countries have even stepped up to the plate? We don't know, right? And we may never know. And there's also this good news, and I want to share this as well. This is from Jewish Voices for Peace. In a huge win for boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, also known as BDS, one of the world's largest pension funds announced it divested almost $500 million from Israel bonds. Norway's pension fund divested the entirety of their Israel bond holdings. And here it is here. BDS victory, Norway pension fund divests $500 million from Israel bonds. You see, guys, there is some good that's happening. It's not as much as we want, but there is some good that's happening, because now we're seeing BDS on the world stage, So shout out to Norway for doing that as well. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to come from this. There's nowhere else for the Palestinian people to go. They are literally pushed as close to Egypt's border as they can be. I don't know what is going to happen, but I do know once this war is over, I think it's only going to be a matter of time before the Palestinian people have to be offered equal rights under the law. Equal. Because I'm tired of hearing about a two-state solution. I've been against the two-state solution for like the past 2 years. People have educated me about this. I am for a one-state solution, but at the end of the day, what we have to call for is equality, not this apartheid that exists now, regardless of what some people say, that exists in the West Bank. We cannot allow that, and we cannot let that continue. We cannot sit up here and let Israel to continue to pull Palestinians out of their homes in the West Bank. What we have to have is equality. So that means that if Israel has an army, that means that the Palestinian people need to have an army as well. Now, and the best way to do this is a one-state solution. One army for all. A secular state. Secular. Miss me with the whole religious state, because that is how Israel has been able to use the excuse that the people should not be there. And it went from being about the religion to being about ethnicity. Imagine if that were happening here. So what we should be calling for is equality. Never forget that.